Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Aspire. Today we're joined by a very special guest, James Smith-Williams, former defensive end in the NFL and a leading voice in violence prevention and allyship. Beyond the field, James has used his platform to confront one of the hardest and most important issues of our time, sexual and domestic violence. Through his work with Set the Expectation and survivor advocate Brenda Tracy, he's challenged what it means to be a man, a teammate, and a leader in sports and in society. In this conversation, we won't just focus on sports, but we'll also focus on accountability, empathy, and the kind of courage that doesn't show up on a scoreboard and takes place outside of the field. So James, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys for having me.
Thank you. So we want to get a little bit of your origin story related to this topic. Our first question would be, what first moved you to step into the space of sexual and domestic violence prevention and advocacy? And how have you balanced that in dealing with that in the NFL as well?
Yeah, so I was a sophomore in college. Brenda Tracy came and presented the NC State. And, she tells her story. It's very riveting. But at the very end, she said, if you are a good man, what are you doing to be a good man? And I was like, okay, like that hits home. So that was my catalyst. That's what really got me started in the space, got me rolling. That next week, I'm a student athlete at NC State. Athletics are a huge part of NC State. And we're playing a baseball game. And I go up to our head coach and the AD, and I'm like, hey, I want to fundraise, we did a goods drive, a cans good drives and non-perishables and essential items for a local domestic violence shelter. So we do that. We get a ton of outreach and support from the community at NC State, and Brenda caught wind of it. And then, we've kind of been rolling down that path ever since.
Perfect. Thank you, James. And I think just with that question that Brenda Tracy asked, what are you doing to be a good man? How do you think you thought of that question when she first asked that? And what do you think you were doing back then versus what you think you're doing now to be a good man? And how do you think that has kind of changed with the culture through your experiences as well?
Yeah. For me, I definitely saw it as a call to action, and it really hit home because, you sit back and you reflect and you're like, dang, I think I'm a good person, right? But what am I doing to be a good person, right? Being a good person isn't a passive thing. So it became very active for me in that moment since. And then, compare and contrast then and now, you learn more from experience, from education, and you have a better understanding of what being a good, productive person in society is. But I think at the end of the day, most people have an understanding of what's good and what's bad, right? So I've learned more, I've gained more knowledge, but in terms of what I'm doing, I don't know if it looks too different than what I was doing after that call to action back in college, because it's really all rooted in who are you trying to be as a person.
So you mentioned, I think, expectations, and I know you have an organization called Set the Expectation, actually. So can you speak a little bit about your role in Set the Expectations, and what responsibilities do you have there? And what weighs heaviest on you in that role?
Yeah. So funny enough, STE actually no longer exists. That was Brenda Tracy's organization, and it closed, and I think earlier this year. So I founded the Champions program, which was essentially a network of professional athletes, and we kind of all from our respective communities. We had a lot of players in DC, a women's soccer player, 3 NFL guys, a women's basketball player. And, for us, it was how do we put our arms around our community, which at the time was DC. And what can we do to support? So we had high schoolers out to NFL games, women's soccer games, women's basketball games. And we also fundraised for a big toy drive. So for me, I would say my role was rather easy. It was what am I passionate about? What do I care about? And, how do I go and engage with those communities? And then, how do I keep the other professional athletes involved in the loop.
Thank you for that, James. And you said how you've worked with other NFL athletes. So I would ask you, how do you think the culture around, let's say, sexual assault or domestic violence is within the NFL? And do you felt like you had a lot of your teammates or friends from other teams supporting you in this kind of role or in this kind of leadership? Or did you feel maybe pushback from leadership or kind of executives within the NFL trying to kind of constrain or restrict your opinions and your leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair question. I would say, in terms of the leadership, they were always open, and they rewarded. Like, you have NFLPA community MVP. Like, there's different awards along the way, and I always got recognized for that stuff. So I think from the top down, they were very supportive of the messaging, which really was just be a good person. Funnily enough, when I was drafted in 2020 by at the time, Washington Redskins and football team, then Commanders, we just had a breaking story. I think the Washington Post broke it, and it was kind of everything that the owner at the time was doing, right, in terms of inappropriate behaviors with women, the culture of the team, some SA accusations, like different things like that. And I remember, I sat down with my agent and Brenda and the PR people, and I crafted the statement. And for me, it was stressful, right? Because I'm a 7th round rookie, so they don't have a lot of ties to me as an organization. And I'm speaking out, but I'm standing on that principle of hey, if I'm a good man, I'm going to this organization. I want to make it clear that, even though we have some ownership that might do certain things, that's not the principle that I stand on or believe in as a man, or that I believe is good for society. So there was some pushback there. But I mean, really the rest of my time in the league, all 5 years, every organization's been super supportive of all the initiatives I wanted to do, all the speakers. So it's been a lot of fun. And then in terms of the locker room, I think this is a common, misconception. But the locker room, it's so different in the NFL. These are, we're adults. We're men. We have families. We have bills to pay. It's not this, when there's this quote unquote locker room talk. It isn't. That's not what we're talking about, right? We have a job to do. We want to do our job, and it's important for everyone to kind of, feel comfortable in the locker room and have a voice. With that being said, though, there's always a couple of, we'll call them bad actors, right? And I think it's important when we talk about culture and defining a culture that, bad actors don't have a home in our environment, in our culture. We're not going to co-sign what they're saying or their pushback. That isn't, we set the standards so we know that, hey, that's not acceptable here. If you want to degrade women or, whatever it may be, in our locker room, in our culture, we don't accept that. So either you conform or you get out.
On that note about maybe the bad actors, as an NFL fan, I've seen constantly news when players are accused of sexual assault or different kind of sexual harassment claims. And usually the NFL's response to that is somewhat of a suspension, and then maybe they leave the NFL for a bit, but then almost if they're good enough, I see them back in a different jersey a couple years later on a different team. What do you think about the NFL's kind of response to sexual assault claims, and how do you think they should be dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the biggest thing is really the education piece, right? And it's tough, and I can acknowledge that it's tough because you're getting kids from all of the different programs all over the country, and who knows what they were taught, and right, and that becomes an NCAA issue of what is mandated, what is the education, who, because someone from, I don't know, a Division III school in Oklahoma probably didn't get the same exposure and education as a player from a division, Clemson, right? Or Florida State, or Alabama, all those other schools where it's so individual program by program. The NCAA really should have a standard education that's pretty thorough. And that's to everyone's benefit. So, it's tough. The NFL, they try the education piece, could they do more? Absolutely. No doubt about it. And I mean, you're right. And the day the NFL it's a business, right? And like when we talked about the cultures, you see some teams that say like, hey, like, no, we don't put up with guys who do this. And we see some teams that say, we want to win. He helps us win. We'll deal with the baggage that comes along with it. And that's a mentality that comes from the ownership, the GMs, and the coaches. And the NFL gives teams a lot of, I guess, flexibility to say, how they want to craft their team and what players. Do I agree with it? No. Like I think everyone should have a standard, but I mean, I can't express enough that the NFL is truly a business that just wants to make money.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I just want to go back to what you were saying earlier about the locker room and how, because this kind of idea of locker room talk is something that we often talk about on this podcast, but I think it's obviously very different us being high schoolers and kind of, I think, the discussions around that compared to obviously you when you were in the NFL, but then also you're saying how in the NFL it is different. So how did it change from when you were in college at NC State to when you went up to the NFL? Was there a big change, or were they still kind of taking it very seriously, in that same culture of either step up or get out was there instilled at NC State as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the staff I had at NC State does an incredible job with culture and, who we are as people, and that's very important to them. And again, that's case by case, program by program. But it is different, right? Because from high school to college is different, college to the league is different because you mature and grow as a man. So like, hey, when I'm 14, 15, whatever, fart jokes are funny, like we're all laughing, giggling, and then when we get up to the NFL, it's like, hey, like, this is now my workspace, right? Like this is where I work, this is how I make my money. There's a totally different shift in dynamic, just like, when you guys, have jobs, have careers, right? You still have fun with your buddies and you laugh and joke, but in the same sense, like this is now my place of work, my place of business. And, you treat it with that respect, right? We still have fun in the locker room. We still laugh and joke, we still have a good time, but there's always like a pretty hard line between laughing and joking to you've become a distraction.
Yeah, and like, what do you think are some other ways that maybe not in the locker room that like people unintentionally promote like that harm or that form of culture of sexual assault, either like on the field or off the field?
Yeah, there's definitely, you could talk about media, right? Music, like, because there is we as Americans, I think the world really has a obsession with sports, right? But especially here in America with the NFL and football, like that is going to be the king jewel. Like there's stuff with music, and there's guys who are big enough, famous enough to be, friends with these rappers who rap about this stuff or sing about this stuff. But I don't know, like I always felt like, at least for me, like I was very lucky and I had teammates that never really went down that path, right? Like they were always respectful. They were loving fathers. They were really good men. But you can definitely kind of see some things trickle in from the outside, right? In terms of the media, how we consume the media, how we use the media, if we're in the media ourselves, right? In the songs or, there's always that risk. But I really, really do think that a lot of guys do a good job of, remembering this as a workplace because, the staff around the NFL team is huge, and there are a ton of women. And I think it was always really good dynamic between the players to, the women on the staff or even the other male employees, and everything was always respectful. It was lighthearted. It's fun, of course. But again, there's always that hard line of like, hey, like we still respect the people that we work with.
Thank you so much for that. But and I think also, even with these cultures that can sometimes just be men just kind of getting along and it just being okay, but you also often talk about that men have to be part of the solution. So I would ask you, for our listeners, what does that mean in concrete terms, and how does that differ rather than just men just kind of riding along and just being more of a bystander than actually being a part of the solution?
Well, I mean, I think you just said it, right? That's that call to action that Brenda gave, like if you're a good man, what are you doing to be a good man? And it's taking these actionable steps, right? Is it calling someone out like, hey, like what you said was very inappropriate, like don't repeat that. Like that's a step. Could it be something along the lines of what I used to do, which was always community service, going back and engaging with kids who don't have positive male role models? Like absolutely. But I think the easiest way is, you set the culture, right, of your school, of your locker room, of your team, whatever it may be. We as men set that culture to hold ourselves accountable. And when someone doesn't hold themselves accountable to our standard we've created, call them out. Right. And I think that is the easiest, most actionable way, especially like depending on the age group. But I mean, that lesson applies to corporate America, NFL locker room, a high school classroom. It's simple, right? You set that standard and we all hold ourselves accountable to it.
Yeah, I think you mentioned like calling people out, which I think like Gabriel and I have dealt with like maybe in like the sports we played or just at school, like trying to be positive role models, especially to like younger kids. Like we run a group at school called BLB, which is Boys Leading Boys, where we often talk about like these issues and like sometimes like ninth graders. I mean, even when I joined the club in ninth grade, it was harder to take it as seriously. But I think now I've understood like the impact of the club and of like what we can do to promote a healthier culture. I've had like stories of my own where one of the younger kids says something that they shouldn't, or like maybe they think they're just joking, but the reaction that comes out of it is a little bit more negative than they think. But I would say like, have you seen that? Do you have a moment or story where you've almost changed someone's perspective or made them think twice about like what they've said?
Yeah, I mean, I think, once I started working with Brenda, and people were introduced to her first, and I'm like, hey, like, this is why this isn't funny, right? Like, this is serious stuff. And you can see how it really impacts someone's life. And like you said, like, when you're in ninth grade, which is 14, 15, you just don't have that perspective, right? So I think the conversation as kids get younger, it's more so centered around respect. All right. And then you get older, then you can talk about consent and, kind of progress from there. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a handful of times where like something is hee hee ha ha, but then like, hey, well, you joke about these things, but this is very real. And someone has experienced this trauma. And we don't know who. It could be a teammate. Like that violence against men happens too, usually from other men. So you never know someone's experience. And like, why would you joke and laugh and he and ha ha about someone's trauma, right? This still probably deeply impacts them. And then too, like you said, in your group, you've created a community, or y'all have created a community, right? So it's not just on you to hold that standard, it's on everybody. So someone who's making that joke should feel like, oh, like I really don't belong, right? Like that's what they should feel. They should feel ostracized because they make these jokes, and you guys as a group, as a club, like you're not laughing, you don't find that funny. So now it's one person laughing and 29 people being like, I think you're a poor fit, or hey, like I think it's inappropriate. And I think you see that rapid, change in response, like you said, in their reaction, and they're like, oh, like that isn't okay, that isn't acceptable. They didn't laugh. Like, let me correct myself, or if I won't correct myself, let me leave.
You and I think, have seen that a lot where people who do make those comments that maybe aren't okay, they often have changed in their response, but also sometimes people just don't change. But then I think, as you said, it's just important to just let them leave, because you don't want to be in a group that has those type of people that really impact the environment and culture. And I would say at NC State, because I think often student athletes can be kind of leaders of the community. So I know, at least within your own football team at NC State, it was a better culture. But how would you say the culture was around sexual assault at NC State in general? Did you feel like, since being a student athlete, that you had a higher responsibility to really go in and kind of interject and make sure that there was a positive culture that didn't reinforce any type of sexual assault? Or did you see the culture being being very distinct between the football team and kind of the overall school life?
No, I mean, I'll start with this. I think we as a society puts athletes on pedestals. And, we say, hey, this is our leaders. Listen, man, like, not everyone that can play football is a leader, like 100%. Like, they might be the best football player ever, does not mean they're a good person. I see this a lot, too, because, I coach now at a high school, and, I see these guys idolize certain players, and I'm like, man, like, that's a bad guy. Like, he's a really good football player. Like, watch his film, take some stuff from it, but, like, you shouldn't be him as a person. Like, just trust me. But with that being said, you are given a platform, right, as an athlete, and I think it's everyone's responsibility to use their platform as wisely as they can. I was very fortunate to have a rather, large one, being from Raleigh, so when I was at NC State and playing football and I was a captain, like I got a larger platform, and, for me, my whole time was like, how do I leverage this platform the best? But with that being said, I think the admin at NC State, the AD, they were very intentional about like, hey, like if this weighs on your heart and you really care about it, then like whatever you want to do, we'll support you. So, we've had some fundraisers at NC State or, goods collections. They let me table in the student union and pass out armbands and, really kind of get a conversation started at NC State, right? But I'm 5 years removed from that, so I don't know if that continued. I don't know what happened there. But, I can say in my time there, they were very supportive of what I wanted to do and of my mission and what I believed in. And my teammates rallied around me and the coaching staff rallied around me and ended up being a big part of NC State, at least while I was there.
And did you get any like feedback from either people at NC State or in the NFL that like changed your approach to like this topic, or like how maybe like you promote it or spread it in a way? Like, did anybody come up to you? Do you have a memory of that?
Yeah, I don't know quite a memory of something like that, but like during like my locker room conversations and even, talking with Brenda, like a big part of this is like you have to meet people where they're at. Like like I said, like you don't know people's backgrounds, you don't know what their education level is of this. So, in that same sense of like, yeah, we're going to hold you accountable, but also like I'm not going to browbeat you so bad that you're never going to engage with me again. We're never going to have a conversation again. Like there's definitely a balance there between like, hey, we don't say that here, but also why don't we say that? Why isn't that okay? Because you don't know what people's backgrounds are, and you really have to truly just meet people where they are. And the only way you can do that is if you know where they're coming from, right? So in this work, it's a balance of like, hey, like meet my standard, but also let me listen to you and listen to your experiences and where you come from, and let's do this together.
Totally, and I think that idea of meeting them where they are is so important, especially in your work. And I would say, so I know you said how Brenda Tracy was kind of the person who changed your outlook and like, what are you doing to be a good man? But that was when you were in college. And do you think that college is the time that people should really have that talk and really sit down and deal with that fact and the culture that is kind of perpetrating sexual assault and domestic violence? Or do you think it should start maybe in high school or even as a freshman in high school, even earlier? Or how do you think maybe parents should approach this if they maybe see their kids kind of falling into that culture of like negative, toxic masculinity? And when would you think it's appropriate for this discussion and this topic to be talked about and really like have a real sit down, hard conversation about it?
Yeah, I think, you start as early as possible. It's, it's something that I believe that you start when, elementary school, and it's like, hey, here's what respect looks like. Or you have like the tea example, like, hey, like, do you want tea? Yes, I want tea. Okay, does that mean I want tea tomorrow? No, that don't mean I won't tee tomorrow. Does that mean I won't tee with? And it's just simple examples like that where you can really hit home on like what is respect. And consent doesn't have to always be around sex. Like I can consent to, I want to hang out, I want to play. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different ways to start integrating these lessons that kids can carry for the rest of their lives. I think you start as soon as possible. I think it looks like, hey, like she said no, she doesn't want to play, so we're not playing today. Or he said no, he doesn't want to play. So, let's stop and respect their boundaries. Like there's so much with the respect and boundaries and, listening and all these different things that I think you start instilling that as early as possible. I think you get to college and you're just learning about consent. Like we're gonna have some problems at our college that we're at. But with that being said, we meet people where they are. Maybe they never have learned about consent or yes or no. Like you would hope so, right? Because they're college students, but you never know. And you teach people where they're at, you meet them where they're at. But I think it's a conversation that you start having as soon as possible, and it can be, like you said, like what or what's no or what's consent or what's respect, what's a boundary. Like there's so many different pieces that go into this big puzzle of like how do we be healthy men.
Yeah, it's funny because I think you mentioned like the T example or the T video, and we actually played that in our group the other day because in the BLB group, because we have like our homecoming coming up. It's actually tonight, and like throughout the day we have like our school's games, and then there's a party at night where like a lot of like the younger kids are like kind of like first exposed to drinking, and like dealing with that like with consent is always like something we kind of do every year, like this talk, and we kind of play that video every year, which is funny that you mentioned it. But I guess I would say for people who want to like do something but don't really know how, like I know for Gabriel and I, we kind of met Alex at this consent summit in DC, and for you, I guess meeting Brenda Tracy was kind of the turning point. But like I guess for people who haven't had those like shifting moments or like shifting experiences, how do you think they can get like directly involved with this work in their like, current life?
Well, I guess I'll plug, Alex's organization, right? I have the right to. Tons of online resources. SC's website is still up and has a ton of online resources. Just wanting to educate yourself on this is a huge step, right? Without a catalyst, like that's very impressive if someone's having those thoughts like, man, like I don't like this. And there are a lot of resources out there that they can access online is what I would definitely say.
Thank you. Yeah, I think often people want to kind of get started, but they often don't feel like they know where to or know how to. And also, I have another question kind of going back to what you were saying on the NFL earlier and how there isn't really a standard for how teams approach sexual assault, or if player on that team has a sexual assault allegation or they're convicted of sexual assault or domestic violence. And do you think you would ever want to maybe go back, not like to playing in the NFL, but go back to maybe approaching the NFL with maybe like a set of standards that should be in place around sexual assault, so it doesn't feel like someone can get off the hook just because they're on a team where maybe the owner doesn't really care about those morals as much and just cares about wanting to win. But so you can really kind of instill a sense of positive culture that it reinforces kind of this like anti-sexual violence or anti-domestic violence as the NFL as a whole. And do you think that kind of setting a set of standards is important, so there's kind of regulations that everyone follows and it's not just person dependent?
Yeah, no, I mean obviously the more you can standardize, like you were saying, the better off we'd be. And it's difficult because the NFL is a private company, a private business, and they can't hold their employees to whatever standard they decide, right? But us as a country, right, we're pretty lenient on this sexual assault and domestic violence stuff. Like it's if you look at the conviction rates, which I was just talking about with a buddy of mine, Derek, I mean, it's low. I would love for the NFL to, because they do with a lot of things, right? To set a high standard and a high bar of no violence tolerated policy or against, women, men, or children. Do I think it'll happen? No, I don't. And it's sad, it's disheartening. But if it were to happen, I think it'd be an incredible thing to have just a clear list of standards and rules and expectations, because I mean there's a lot of standard and rules and expectations in the NFL, but there's a lot of discretion too. And like you said, a lot of it depends on how productive of a player, that just got in trouble.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna kind of end it off with a couple more questions. I think you spoke a little bit about this, but like some critics argue that athletes speaking out on social issues distract from their job, or they should quote unquote shut up and play. So how do you respond to that culture?
I mean, someone who says that, I mean, I don't have to take them seriously, right? Because at the end of the day, an athlete's still a human being, and they're still a part of society, and they still have this huge platform and pedestal. So, shame on the person who doesn't want them to use it, for the right thing, right? To speak out and try and make society better. So that's not, I mean, if you people who give that feedback and shut up and dribble, like that, they're not even worth paying attention to. Like that is in one ear out the other, because they want to live in a society that isn't beneficial to everybody. It's a really shame on that person.
Totally. And I think also, how do you think being in the NFL and that being such like a high contact sport, and do you think that the culture around the NFL is different from maybe other professional sports leagues where it isn't as physical of a sport? Let's say track and field or baseball, and how that culture is shifted because of kind of the immense like contact that has to happen in a football game, and how does that shift kind of the public opinion around kind of the culture and also between players?
Yeah, and that's I heard that a lot too, and it's I don't think someone's job has to be who they are, right? Like football is a very violent physical sport, right? But that doesn't mean that you have to be a violent physical person, right? So for me, it's a switch that I flipped, right? Of like, okay, like now I'm going out here and performing my job. And my job requires that I be a violent physical person. But still, like I'm gonna respect my opponent. I don't want anybody to get hurt. Like we're all just out here doing our jobs. And then, James the person, like I'm not a violent physical person, right? Like that's just not who I am. And that doesn't have to be who you are. And that doesn't mean that there aren't violent physical baseball players, right? Like that, just because just your work isn't who you are. I think that's a very important distinction when you talk about identity. And I'll say this too, like women's sports has led a lot of this stuff and a lot of these narratives and dialogues and conversations. And we're often just like this issue as a whole, this topic as a whole, like men are kind of playing catch up, and that's no different in the sports realm either. But yeah, that's just because you're playing a violent physical sport doesn't mean you need to be a violent physical person.
Yeah, thank you. And just finally, James, like what is one thing that you want our audience to take away from this talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the catalyst that Brenda gave me. And if you are a good man, what are you doing to be a good man? This isn't a new issue in any sense of the word. And we've seen women. If women could end domestic violence, sexual assault, or any of the survivors of it could end it, it would have happened, right? So it takes us as a society to put our arms around these people and say, hey, like, you know what, we're going to create a standard and an expectation that if you want to perpetrate violence, or if you want to, any of those things associated with sexual assault and domestic violence, if you want to do that, then hey, like, you aren't welcome. So change it or get out.
Thank you so much for that, James. I think that's such an important message that all of our audience members would love to hear, and I think one that will resonate with a lot of people and just has definitely resonated with me. So with that, thank you so much, James, for being on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate you.
Thank you, James. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.